listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, and welcome you to episode number 22. Today, we welcome actor, writer, filmmaker, musician, poet, yoga teacher, singer-songwriter, husband, and father, James Morrison. James has been on the professional stage since the early 1980s and has won many awards, such as the Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle Award for Outstanding Performance. On TV, you may recognize him from Law and Order SVU, Frasier, Quantum Leap, The X-Files, The West Wing, 6 Feet Under, and the 1995 series Space Above and Beyond. On 24, he played CTU Director Bill Buchanan beginning in the 4th season. James has done about 100 plays at theaters like the McCarter Thater, the Jolla Playhouse, the Mark Taper Forum, the LA Stage Company, the Salt Lake Acting Company, the Old Globe, and the Pasadena Playhouse. He and his wife have made several films together, including a feature-length documentary, Showing Up. As a playwright, his play, Leave Your Fears Here, explores his journey through his son's brain cancer. Check out his website, jpmorrison.com, for links to his projects, songs, and amazing details about James. Now, this episode does include sensitive topics, including various types of addictions. If you feel it may be triggering to you, then we encourage you to listen to the episode in a therapeutic community to ensure you are safe and supported. So, what are we waiting for? Fill up your coffee and let's get started. So, good evening, because listeners, we're actually recording this on September 11th. It won't be aired on September 11th. It will be aired later in the month or in October. However, I am very excited to have a special guest here today. I would say actor. However, in my research, I see that on your website, so I'm doing a teaser, although the audience has already seen your title on Spotify or whatever they're listening on. However, I'll do a teaser. So on your website, you're listed as actor, writer, filmmaker, musician. However, I would say in a little research, a little more particular, we would say poet, yoga teacher, singer-songwriter, and husband and father as well that we would add to the mix to that. And I'm sure there is a diverse other categories that you would add to that. So I'm going to stop and say we have James Morrison here with us today and allow you to please introduce yourself.
Hey, Ange, thanks. That was nice. That was a pretty good introduction, actually. Accurate. I think that the way I would introduce myself best would just be just to cop to the notion that whatever I have or whatever I create, whatever I am or pretend to be or aspire to be, all stems from the hope and the fact that I was taught that you can't keep it if you don't give it away. So I was influenced by people in those rooms, the recovery rooms, and you're told when you first knew, you're told, find somebody that has what you want and get to know them and ask them to be your sponsor. That's what I think I did when I was younger and I saw artists, actors, singers, and they moved me to a point where I finally one day just said, I think I want to do or try to do to other people what those people just did to me. And I didn't even really know what form that would take. I was very dissatisfied and frightened and unsure of myself in what I thought was the real world. And I needed to find a world that was more hospitable. And it was a kind of a world of make-believe. And so when I discovered the theater and that I had a place in it, that was huge for me. It changed my life. And so I guess that's the best way I could introduce myself. The last two things that you mentioned, though, at this point are the most important in my life as a husband and a father. So, but we'll get into that later.
Love it. So I have a quick question. In my research,
Sure.
I want to know, true or false. So you talked about your life. You were born in, I have this written down as Bountiful. What is this state?
Bountiful, Utah.
Utah. But you grew up in Alaska.
Right.
And then on your website, it says that you started to make a living as an actor when you ran away to join the circus as a clown and wire walker for Satan's Wild Animal Circus of Agony, and then served as your theatrical apprenticeship with the Alaska Repertory Theater. True or false? Absolutely
Right.
true.
Well, everything's true there except for the name of the circus. That's not really the actual name of the circus was the Carson and Barnes Wild Animal Circus, and it was a 5-ring circus, back in the day when they had 36 elephants and horses and camels, and back in the 70s. So that part is sort of half true. Even though I did run away and join the circus, I actually did that. I think just so if I was lucky, I was thinking if I'm lucky enough to live another 50 years, I hope to be able to look back and be able to say, yeah, I ran away to join the circus because it was insane. It was as insane as I was at the time as a 21-year-old. So it was perfect for me, actually.
Well, that is pretty cool. So,
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that, and I wanted to start with that because in my research of you, which is available online, so I don't know any of your inner and outer things that you're going to share with us today, most likely. I thought this individual is incredibly diverse. So many different topics, and that aligns very much with the audience. So many different topics. So when you talk about, obviously, ran away to get to the circus, right? So you were in Alaska, you grew up there. I'm sure you have a lot to tell about your childhood and the impact your childhood and what that looked like in your future. You've already hinted a little bit that we have a recovery story here. I believe it's in alcohol, correct?
Well, whatever you had, really.
Exactly. Well, that is me. My psychiatrist is just like, you are really a high achiever. You can just go from one thing to the next and just do really well. So I get that. Okay. So a little bit of that journey. And then you've been incredibly successful in your professional career. I can appreciate that. And I can also probably appreciate how that's been a bit of a challenge for you, looking at the dichotomy between the different worlds and how you might have an outside persona and an internal struggle and how that may impact you. And so when I take a step back and look at an individual, I think, where do we start? So I think, why don't we start with the topic that you're most passionate to start with first?
I think I'm most passionate about the thing that probably shaped who I am at this moment more than anything else did. And before it happened, 14 years ago, my sobriety was that thing. Meeting the woman that I live with now, my wife and my partner, my life partner, was certainly one of those events. But up until from the point where my son got ill, everything changed. Even my perception of my sobriety and my recovery. I used to go through the litany of near-death experiences and the drunkalogue and the relationship destroyed and the opportunities that I missed and destroyed while I was drinking and using in that 15 years that I did from the age of like 12 to 28, 16 years. When my son got ill, everything changed and it brought a perspective that I really didn't have before that. I don't do any of that anymore. That event, my son's illness, which he's recovered from, by the way, he had a brain tumor when he was 10 years old. He's 24 years old now. I like to put that out there right away so that everyone knows it had a happy ending. But during that and in his recovery, and, my wife and I joke, it fucked us up. Knowing something about trauma as you do, your life starts over again when you see from that moment on, everything before that, it takes on a different hue, You see it differently. You remember it differently. I'm just going to sort of fly off on a tangent here for a sec, because I saw today a sober celebrity that I rather admire. And I came across him talking about regret. And he was talking about how he didn't have any regrets. And I was listening to him with such, I don't know, I was in awe of what he was saying and the place that and then I thought, wait a minute. I started thinking about my regret. What's the meaning of regret? It's something, I think, that we feel the need to make amends for, right off the top of my head. And so I said, no, I have plenty of those. I mean, they teach us to look for those things in the program so that we can live our amends and make our amends. And I'm going to tie it back to what I was talking about before I went there. But my regrets have a different, from the moment my son took ill, I have no regrets. Before that happened, I still can revisit things that I did and had to make amends for, and I regret them. Opportunities missed, like I said, or violations of trust, relationships ruined, whatever. And I now know I'm not the same person at all, even from the time before I got sober. But I mean, before that event, and I think it takes an event like that to finally shake us to the core and make us see life as it really is. I mean, from that moment on, I only have gratitude. I don't have those feelings for things that happened before that as clearly and as vividly, memories what brought me to my disease or brought me to the awareness of it. Am I making sense?
You are. Unless you're in the circle of recovery and you've been through this journey, it seems bizarre. Especially, I believe it seems bizarre for most individuals that I talk to when they first enter. So they're at their bottom for whatever addiction. And listeners, I just want to be super clear. This is any type of challenge or addiction we're talking about. And, I would even include myself with my kidnapping and stuff to do with that. Okay. When you're at the bottom and you feel horrible, you think, I am never, ever, ever going to be grateful for anything to do with this. And the number of individuals who share something exactly what they're saying, gratitude from that point forward because of just how much they've learned how to make amends and the healing through making amends and the relationships, the quality of the relationships they now have with individuals, either through making the amends or how they've learned to have better relationships with people now in their recovery journey than they ever did before. I mean, I've said in previous episodes, I don't want all of the world to have to go through addiction to have this, but if I don't know, kind of like the 12 steps or some of those recovery programs could be taught in middle school. Those life skills of going through learning how to say, I resent this and this was my part of it. This is kind of their part of it. And I needed to own my part and I need to do that. And I need to do prayer and meditation to whoever my higher power is and live my life in this way. I just think what a better world the world would be, right? And more individuals. It makes complete sense because so many individuals have said, wow, I never, ever, ever thought I would say this, but my life is so much better now than it was before.
I hear exactly what you're saying in terms of what we forget to do. And it takes us a while to appreciate the power of this. Is at the top of our list of amends has to be ourselves. If we can't forgive ourselves first, and I heard this in one of your podcasts as I was doing my homework and listening to you talk. We're talking about the yoga practice and the gifts that it can bestow, service that it teaches us, and the awareness that it teaches us. And one of the things so amazing about the yoga practice that I discovered, we're not just doing the practice with our own bodies, we're doing it with everyone who's ever come before in our bodies, our ancestors that are living through us. And we almost get to live this circle of amends that we're aware. And the reason I bring up the yoga practice, I was trying to think, wait a minute, how am I going to make this connection? It's ahimsa. It's nonviolence. It's non-harming. And so the first amends that we have to make is I'm no longer going to harm myself with the kind of thinking that I don't deserve this. It's hard for us to put ourselves on that list of people to make amends to. Especially in speaking about recovery, when you said the word circle, it reminded me of 10, I don't know how many years ago, 11 years ago, I was in Pittsburgh working on a series, and I'd never been to an Al-Anon meeting in my life, and I qualify. I grew up with alcoholics. They were hardcore drinkers, divorced, and they were sober when they died, my parents, and I got to go to meetings with my mother before she died, 40 years ago. I never went to an Al-Anon meeting, and I don't know why. So I went to this meeting with some friends in the cast that were sober, and we were sitting in this huge circle of people. I mean, it was 50 feet across, and
Wow.
I don't know how many people. And each person's, we went around one person at a time, shared for a few minutes. Well, straight across from me, this woman started the meeting. And the first words out of her mouth were, "I couldn't wait to escape my home." And I heard that, and I just started weeping. I mean, tears. It was like I don't know if you've ever had acupuncture, but if you when you start to get the needles in a certain spot,
yes,
the stuff starts to flow, and you don't even feel grief. You don't feel, you're not weeping. It's just like this release of emotion, and just the tears ran in rivers, and from that point all the way around, I was still just flowing tear, and finally got to me. And I couldn't even speak. All I could do was just point at that woman and just go, and she said, "Yeah, no, I know, I get it." And I just turned to the other person, and they went, because that was what my life was. It was a series of escapes, and that was the first one I needed to make. And it took me a lot of years to get back to that. Wow, I just riffed on that.
No, I can
That's
relate.
I heard in your yeah.
I
Thanks.
can relate, and I venture to say a lot of listeners can relate. The episode, we're recording this on Monday, September 11th. The episode that I released on Friday, I released it early because I was going camping this weekend. Camping, I had no cell or Wi-Fi service, which I was just like, oh my gosh, amazing. And yet I need to get a podcast out. Let me push it out. And then #priorities. The episode that was released on Friday was the link between childhood trauma and addiction. And I love the episode. The stigma and the stereotype that I often hear that makes me cringe are, oh, this person is awful because they are an alcoholic or they're an addict or all of these things. And the reality is you don't have to sit in the rooms very long, and you realize sitting in that circle Friday, all day Saturday. And I was on this retreat with one other woman and about 20 something men, specifically man after man, in the tears of childhood, just various forms of trauma or various forms of escape, various forms of growing up in families of alcoholics or sex addicts or name it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about what you just said about the Al-Anon thing. I completely qualify. I come from very much a family of alcoholic. My uncle unfortunately passed away from consequences of alcoholism, and I absolutely qualify. I've never been to an Al-Anon meeting now.
Yeah, well, we need to address the things that, who was it that told me this? One of my sponsors over the years. And I mentioned, I qualify. I've just never been. And he said, well, but you're taking care of what you need to take care of, which is your alcoholism. I mean, a lot of people in those Al-Anon rooms don't have that. You start to treat yourself rather than the alcoholic in your life. And you find the things that you need to address in order to cope or grow or learn or forgive, right? We take care of what we need to take care of, first. In fact, that's why I brought up the need to practice nonviolence at home first, and the need for self-forgiveness to get to the point where you can love yourself, because, this sounds like as much of a cliche as a day at a time or easy does it. You really can't be loved until you love yourself. You can't offer the love that you need to offer someone without first loving yourself. And people go, no, I can never love myself. Speaking of stigma, look at the stigma attached to, loving yourself, because people don't understand it. It's a huge step to take. It's scary. It's incredibly frightening. You look like
the
you're
one
thinking
thing I did, I am. I was thinking of a couple of things.
Okay.
One thing is I had to Google what the meaning of regret was when you were saying that. So regret, the verb of regret is to feel sad, repentant, or disappointed over something that's happened or been done, especially a loss or missed opportunity. That's the verb of regret. The noun is a feeling of sadness, repentance, or disappointment over something that's happened or been done. So, for listeners, when we think about regret, when I personally think about regret, do I have regrets in life? Yes. And I feel like I've lived a pretty amazing life despite those. And I really want more and more listeners to feel that. And I strongly believe that ties a little bit to what you were just saying, because in order to feel that, to feel the balance between, yes, I'm having regret, but yet I'm living a great life, ties to the ability to forgive, the ability to love yourself. The episode that we did on boundaries, so that was episode number 12, was on boundaries. We talked about codependence. Addicts are known. They are experts at codependence in the rooms, right? And so part of that is learning, oh yeah, I can love because I can love others, but not love myself. I really like that you pointed that out, because I can imagine there are a lot of listeners who might be listening right now and thinking they might be at their bottom. They may have just, I don't know, done something that they regret, that they are ashamed of. Most likely there is someone listening to this at some point that thinks they've done something that someone will never, ever, ever forgive them for, or that they will never be able to overcome, or they will never, and I'm saying that word never because that's a word we can't say, because there is a truth beyond the word never. And a lot of the truth behind the word never, or beyond the word never, comes from love, comes from amends, comes from community, comes from connection. So maybe actually community and connection, when we talk about this, the circles are a little different in my world than what they probably are in your world. Can you talk a little bit about what connection looks like? I don't know. You were talking about you're on the set, maybe traveling, or I have no idea what the life of an actor going and working through a series and the time commitment and what that looks like to be able to then attend meetings or not attend meetings, and how your sobriety looks like when that comes into play.
It all comes back to, especially in the workplace, but that translates to any relationship. We're equal partners in this endeavor. We bring the light. We try to bring the light. We try to offer solution. We try to live in the solution rather than in the problem. As I said when we started, I mean, it's a service. It's a responsibility of being of service. In the workplace, I'm just a worker among workers. In this relationship right now, I'm a conversant. I'm in a conversation, an exchange of ideas that we're passionate about in recovery, in being of service. If we were to talk about anything else that we're passionate about, it would be the same thing. Yeah, I mean, that's simply as I can put it. It comes back to the stuff that's been said time and time again. We're all in this together. You know, when somebody needs help, you step in and help them. When they can't speak for themselves, you find a way to give them a voice, or you speak up for them.
Oh, I got to interrupt.
Help them.
I got to interrupt.
Sorry?
I have to interrupt right here. Okay, so the episode that we'll release right before this is an interview I did with an author. Actually, I have the book here because I need to send it to him for his autograph. But an author, Daniel Joseph, he wrote Backpack to Rucksack. Okay. And the reason what you just said is in the interview, we talk in the beginning about the struggle that he has as an author, telling stories about vets who struggle with mental health challenges and suicide awareness. And then this book also talks a lot about organizational leadership from the military perspective as well. But we started off the conversation because he had just met with an individual that had an incident and the vet was like, I want you to share my story. And Dan said, I'm feeling a little bit almost like survivor's guilt. He said, I'm feeling a little guilty because these people want to share my story and I'm putting it in a book and I'm making money off the book. And, then I go on a book tour and I'm feeling guilty. And he said, I have this burden in my head. And then I shared from my perspective, I make zero money off of the podcast. And the challenge that I have is that for every episode that I release, I listen to the episode so many times in preparation for it to be released that it is a huge mental cognitive overload. There are many episodes that I will edit a little bit and then I just have to take a break because it's a lot emotionally and mentally. And so we were talking in the episode about the power of being a voice for somebody else. And I will say that I have so much respect for all individuals that are willing to be a voice for those, because there are individuals who everyone's story needs to be shared. Everyone has a story that's absolutely amazing.
That's right.
And I just believe so many stories are not shared because for whatever reason, that individual, maybe they're not in a place to share their own story or they don't have an outlet. And individuals like us, we have an outlet. And if we can share these stories, that is amazing. For me, it's a huge blessing to be a host of this podcast, to be able to open it up and you share your story or the stories of someone else. So I just had to say that, giving a voice to somebody else.
Listen, if we don't share our stories and don't advocate for sharing a story, we run the risk of missing opportunities to provide experience, strength, and hope for someone who needs it. It's the basis of a recovery program, is sitting around in a circle, sharing your story and doing a fourth and fifth step and having someone listen to it and go, oh no, I understand how you feel guilty about that. You can't live with the shame that caused. But man, listen to this. That's nothing. And then you hear another story and you go, oh my God. So what do I do? Well, make amends. Live your amends. Now, if we didn't hear those stories, if someone didn't share those stories with us, if we didn't share our stories initially with them, how I got sober, I was doing a play and I would come in every night hungover. I knew the program. I knew the tradition of sharing the experience, strength, and hope. And this is my story. And I hope somebody hears it who needs to hear it. And, so I would talk to this guy when I come into the theater every night. And I wasn't drunk. I was hungover from the night before. And I knew the program because my mom was in it. I knew how it worked. Finally, one night I said, man, I can't live like this. I can't live like this. And he said, yeah, it's going to kill you. But just your luck, it's going to take you 50 years to die. And I went, oh my God, I can't live like this for 50 years. And he said, no. Well, there's a solution. There's an easier, softer way. Now, if we hadn't shared our stories with each other, if we weren't sharing our stories with each other right now, that somebody may hear and go, oh, wait, I can love myself. I can forgive myself. What? Because we don't know who's going to hear that. We don't know who's going to hear our story. If I am talking about my sobriety, that's what it is. It goes beyond even breaking the stigma. It's someone hearing it and going, oh my God, I feel the same way. I feel the same way. There's hope. It's no different than when you're in the hospital like we were. We lived there 3 months with my boy. People would show up giving us hope and love in all forms. Food, Buster Keaton movies to watch, conversation, music, just love. We're here for you. That's survival. That's how we survive. It's not, stocking up and isolating and, storing food and water. And that's not survival. That's separation. Survival is sharing what it was like, what happened, or just showing up and saying, I hear you. You are heard. I see you. Here's the love you need. Here's the hope you need. And I need to do this. That's why I'm here. That's what it's about.
That. So one of the trends we started a couple episodes ago, the audience, if you're listening, you've already heard us say this, and I will repeat it at the end of this episode, is the phrase that we will hold hope for you until you're able to hold hope for yourself.
That's right.
And that is so true. And because we have a diverse audience, the fourth and fifth step that James just mentioned are, the fourth step is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So the fourth step is basically, and depending on the program that you're in, and I can say this because I'm in a few different programs, depending on the program that you're in, it's really looking at all areas of your life. And I love it because the fourth step is like, hey, let me look at all areas of my life. And if you have a really good sponsor, So
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have a really good sponsor, then you should get a really good sponsor. Like,
So let me just
Yes,
interject
do it.
something.
Yes.
In terms of the fourth step, I had an amazing sponsor when I did my first one. And he said, listen, when you go to the grocery store, when you work at a grocery store, when you take inventory, fearless and searching moral inventory in a supermarket, a grocery store, you got to look at everything that's on the shelves, or you can't know what's missing. And you look at something else and you go, you know what? This is not selling. We need to get rid of this. Or, this works. People are digging this. We need to restock this. I mean, that's what an inventory is, right? Straighten up the cans on the shelf. The boxes are askew, whatever. That's the inventory.
That is amazing.
That really helped me. Yeah.
Yeah. So listeners, that's it. It's every little thing. Good sponsor would
good and
challenge
bad.
you.
Good and bad.
Yes. Good and bad. Absolutely. My sponsor was like, oh, wait. In this one program, she was just like, I think you kind of slacked off and was a little easier on this. Why don't you try again? And I love that because the whole value in it to get the most out of it is to do exactly that. And good and bad. I'm so glad you said that because as addicts, it's easy sometimes to find all the bad things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It falls into believing we can't love ourselves and yet forget all of the good things. So good and bad. Thank you for that part. So 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And 5, admitted to our higher power, whatever your higher power is, to ourselves and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And so the power in that is admitting to ourselves. So part of that is like, hey, and James, not just saying out loud, but like, let's acknowledge this.
Yeah. And where we were wrong, promptly admitted it, accepted when to do so would cause harm to others. And that's the hard part. Starts of course with ourselves, right? Number one. Right? Say the first part of step 5 again.
Okay, so admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Listeners, so here's the problem. When you say things over and over, you're like, I should pull it up, especially when I'm doing it on a podcast to make sure I'm saying it exactly right.
Accuracy is the basis of self-reliance. That's what my acting teacher used to say.
Oh, really? I love that.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, from the exact. So step 4, if we were pulling up from the exact text of the big book, once again, made the searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Yeah.
You know what is really interesting, which I think is a good thing, is that when you start Googling these, you can find different ways to say similar things, which I really like that. And I say that because I will say oftentimes I hear individuals say, oh, I went to this meeting of, we're going to use AA as an example. Okay, listeners, we can talk about any addiction. And they're like, oh, AA is not for me because I went to this meeting. Yeah. And I like the example when I went to Blue Ridge and we were talking about it. And it was just like, wait, did you only ever go to one club or one bar? No, because you went to one and you thought, wow, I didn't like that bartender or I didn't like the music or their food sucked.
Or did you just hang with one crowd of people or one, we had a variety of
exactly. So, but what you did was you went to a variety of them until you found the one that worked for you.
Right.
So I do want to say this, listeners, is that James and I are talking about the 12 steps in AA. It's not the only form of recovery. There's Dharma recovery. There's smart recovery. We've talked about this in other realms. So 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to our higher power, to ourselves, another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have, of course, in the big book it says God. I'm just substituting higher power. Remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked our higher power to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all, which is amazing.
Yep.
9, which you were just saying.
There's the list.
Direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
That's right. We were talking about the sort of cross-fertilization of recoveries. What I was first told when I started coming to the recovery rooms, Was it, you know, you're going to hear a lot of stuff. You're going to hear people do drunkalogs. You're going to hear newcomers, you know, ramble on and on and on and on because they're just puking out this information. It's a new world and they're shouting it from the rooftops, whatever. Listen for the similarities between your experience and what you hear and not the differences. Listen for the similarities, and that'll keep you coming back. And you'll hear them. The other thing I was going to point out is when you first come to these recovery rooms and you do those questionnaires, you know, the 20 questions of why you might be a drunk or, you know, addict or, you know, whatever you're being treated for. And then they say, take it, you know, right away. And then I'm just going to keep talking about this and hopefully I'll remember my point. Take it right away. And then take it another year, take it again and see how many more yes questions you have. And so, you know, I did that over the years. And finally now I'm at yes to everything. I did everything on that questionnaire because there's no, you know, as the fog lifts, as we get further and further into our recovery, and as more, as they say, is revealed, we start to see that it's not that hard to listen for the similarities. They seek us out almost. You know, they're like heat-seeking missiles. They find us almost. It becomes effortless. You and I could have this conversation with completely different backgrounds. You could be as far away from, you know, Jack Daniels being your drug of choice as I could be as far away from your experience that you spoke of earlier. And yet, you know, we can leave this experience feeling seen and heard. Because we're listening with bigger ears. I mean, it's that thing that we talked about with yoga too. As you quiet, I'm an atheist now. That's my deal. But we have to be quiet, and we get quieter as we recover, so that we can hear the answers. You can't hear the answers when the monkeys are chattering and the insane, you know, whatever they are, 7 dwarves are in our head chopping down the trees. But that's stuff going on. We have to be quiet so we can hear the answers. And that's I think what the similarities are for me, is just listening. It's a deeper listening. That speaks to the yoga practice too, because that's what that teaches us. What is it? Svadhyaya, I think it is. The 8 limbs of yoga. Self-study. It doesn't just mean being an autodidact or being self-taught. It means studying the self. And the more we do that through the listening in the rooms to this is a meeting. We're having a meeting right now.
Where 2 or more are gathered.
2 or more are gathered. So the listening. I've learned so much from you already. I thank you.
Yeah, well, I thank you as well. I was just thinking about what you were just saying, learning, and in some of the episodes, I've talked a little bit about this idea of don't judge your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10. Okay. So you see, you know, James has had sobriety for how many years did you say? 16?
I'll be 42 and
so more than that.
In about a month. Sobriety? October 4th, 42 years.
Wow. So yes, listeners.
A day at a time, I'll get 42.
Exactly. 100% that. You know, when you hear these words of wisdom and you pause and think, wait, love myself, self-study, yoga, all of these things, do not compare your chapter 1 to James's chapter 10. However, to be super clear, James and Ange both had a chapter 1. Absolutely. You cannot get to a chapter 10 without a chapter 1.
Right.
And I think that's the power of listening.
And listen, regardless of how long you have, you know, whatever program you're in, you're constantly reviewing the steps of your recovery. I mean, listen, if I thanked you for keeping me sober today, it's because I looked at every chapter that you've shown me so far. And I know I can't do it by myself. When I am by myself and I reflect on that stuff, I have to look at all the chapters that have come before the one I'm at now in order to, you know, understand my journey. And so that's what I was saying when we first started. And I think this is a really amazing way to sort of wrap this up, is that I look, before my son's illness, I used to look at the beginning of my sobriety as the beginning of as my first chapter. That book, while it wasn't destroyed, it's still on my shelf. I mean, I reference it. It's a constant source of reference. I started another book when that happened. And, I usually start these things by saying, and I can't remember if I did or not when we started, that this is all just my opinion. I'm not an authority on any of this. I wrote this down so I could remember about the part in the big book that talks about we're like men, it says, who have lost their legs. We never grow new ones. You remember that?
Yes.
In chapter 3 of the big book, 4th paragraph, any number of us have read any number of times, or we've heard. It says we are like men who have lost their legs. We never grow new ones. Well, I have grown new ones. I've seen people grow new ones in every meeting I've ever been in. I've watched them grow. The reason that I know this is a fact now, and I didn't know this before my son was ill, I watched him grow new legs. He couldn't walk, talk, or see after his brain surgery. And I watched him recover. I recovered with him, both my wife and I did. And we look back at those days now, just like I look back at the beginning of my sobriety, chapter 1. And I say, my wife and I say, who were those people? Who did that? Who were they? I mean, when we look at what they went through and what they did, we didn't do it alone. As I said, we had those people who gave us hope and love in all forms to get us through it. But we dragged each other through it when we had to. And I look back on my sobriety in the same way. I look back and I go, who was that? Before I got sober, who was that person? And who was the person who finally said, you know what, I want to live. I don't want this disease to kill me. And part of surviving it is talking to you about it, is talking to anybody that I can talk to about it, as long as it's appropriate, right? But sharing my experience, strength, and hope so that they might have the same thing. That's what it's about.
When you were just saying that, I think that phrase, to some of us that hear it a lot, I think we take it for granted. We don't pause enough in it, but it's experience. So experience is so much, right? Yeah. And it's sharing all of that encompasses experience. It's sharing strength, the strength that we've learned through the experience, the good times, the challenging times, the times when our fellows helped us, the times where we stumbled and we didn't do what we thought we wanted to do, the times where we had regrets, the times where we made amends, and the times we failed, the times when individuals forgave us, the times that we forgave others, the times we forgave ourselves, that strength that we had for that. And then the hope for today, the hope for ourselves, the hope for our family members, the hope for the individuals around us, the hope for the random person in the next meeting we're going to go to who happens to stumble into that door, and that is their very first meeting, and it is the very first page of their very first chapter 1. The hope for that individual, that experience, strength, and hope.
Yep, that's right.
So you have your favorite quote for us. I want to hear your favorite quote. And is there anything that you were really hoping that we would share today for the listeners that we haven't shared yet, for the family members of those who may be struggling? I think a lot of times is that we do have a lot of family members who listen to this podcast who are really looking for ideas, suggestions, hope on how they can be supportive of their hurting loved ones.
The thing that comes to mind always when I'm asked about this is, without being prescriptive, it's find a way to practice gratitude. Find a gratitude practice. Find a way every day, several times a day. Just like people say a day at a time. Sometimes I'll say a heartbeat at a time. Find, whenever you need to feel this, find a way to get in touch with the things that you're thankful for and the things that you feel grateful for. That's my primary practice now. That's my higher power, is gratitude. If I find myself in a state of gratitude, everything follows. My spiritual condition follows that. When I'm out of touch with my gratitude, I lose my center, I lose my footing. So that's, I think, the most important thing that I've found. And try that. I would say try that. See if it works for you.
I couldn't agree more. We did a whole episode 5 with my friend Linda, was on self-care. And we talked about gratitude and how I convinced her to start doing daily gratitude lists. I got her a gratitude list today and it's really amazing. I'm on the West Coast. She's on the East Coast and I get to see the things that she's grateful for in that moment. But I love that heartbeat to heartbeat gratitude because it's really hard to be too angry at life when you're constantly being grateful.
Well, so it's almost impossible, isn't it?
It is. But I know you have a quote. So what's your favorite quote?
I've been thinking about this. It's something that my son reminded me when he was in the hospital because I was lost in my anger and my fear. And he reminded me that, what was going on was nobody's fault. And this is a 10-year-old kid who's doing this. This is how wise my boy is. And he reminded me, and I attribute this to him because, several other people have said it, but because of who it came from at the time, he said, if you were your best friend, how would you treat yourself? And I said, because I knew the answer, I'd treat myself with love. And he said, with love, yes. And he reminded me that I was too angry and and he went on, of course, to say that, he thought at a certain point, he was getting angry at people and he thought he was starting to hate them. And he realized that he was afraid. He was just afraid and he was angry at himself. And so that's, I think, the quote is, how would you treat yourself if you were your best friend? It saves my ass. That one,
That is amazing. I love that. Alrighty. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thanks, Ange. It was lovely talking to you.
Yeah, this is special. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You just listened to episode number 22, where actor James Morrison shared his experience, strength, and hope. If you want to learn more about James, visit his website, jpmorrison.com. I've added the link in the show notes. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAND is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We have a new Between the Lines blog series where we read select blog posts on the podcast, so submit your blog post today. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. If you do so, we'll give you a shout out. We are proud that every individual working with RAND does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by clicking the love, not like icon on our podcast and subscribing. The reception of this podcast blows us away, and hence we are seeking more volunteers. If you're interested, please email us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We hope you will connect with us at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, where you can donate to the mission, read blog posts, and stay in the loop about upcoming events. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Recovery Advocate Network and on Twitter at Rand to Wellness. So, listeners, pause what you're doing and subscribe, follow us, give us a 5-star rating, provide some feedback, and share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose hearts you will touch. We already have listeners in close to 20 countries around the world. This week, we welcome Brazil to the podcast. Be a part of the reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or if in the United States, dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you live in one of those other countries outside of the U.S. and have information for helpful resources, please email us so that we can provide those resources to listeners. We know you are very busy, and so I want to say thank you. We are grateful that you spent some time with us today to listen to James' experience, strength, and hope. And we look forward to hearing all the stories about your own hope for your future and for those around you. Now, back to your coffee.